All right, federalism. What is federalism?
Concentrated government.
What?
Like central government.
There is a,
Central government, and then there's the state government.
yes, there's basically two levels of government. Levels is probably the wrong word, but two governmental entities. Okay? And it's one of the protections that they created for us in the Constitution. Okay? They wanted to make sure that the states continued to have an identity. This is why the Electoral College is kind of hard to me to get rid of, in my opinion. It's because it protects the state's identity as states. And one of the things about federalism is it does that as well. Okay? So the tension is between the federal government wanting to do things and the limited powers they have because of federalism. Now, McCulloch versus Maryland, what was it about? What were the facts about?
The bank and the state of
The National Bank.
tried
They had a national bank, there was a branch in Maryland, and what did Maryland do? Tried to tax it. Tried to tax it. Legal case resulted. Goes to the Supreme Court. Chief Justice Marshall writes the opinion in the case. And what do they decide?
That the
Federal government is supreme.
Yeah.
Based on what?
Yeah.
The Supremacy Clause. Yes. It wasn't a trick. The Supremacy Clause. Okay? And what about, and then we have another clause that's important. You understand the Supremacy Clause, right?
Yeah.
It just says federal government is supreme, okay, in the area where it has the right to act. The Commerce Clause. Where does it appear in the Constitution, the Commerce Clause? Section what? 8. Section 8 of Article 1, right? One of the things that's worth doing before you take the AP test, soon actually, is to read Section 8 again, to see what powers Congress has. Because you need to know what kinds of things they can do. And what we have focused on in the course is what tends to be the focus of everybody, because the Congress relies on the Commerce Clause so often. We talk about the Commerce Clause. And even though you don't need to know Gibbons versus Ogden, it is a case that established the breadth, the reach of the Commerce Clause. Gibbons was about steamboats, not ships, steamboats. And it had to do with the river between New Jersey and New York, which I think is the Hudson. I'm not sure about that, but I think it's the Hudson. Okay? And New York, I believe it was, one of the states tried to control the steamboat traffic. Okay? They gave a license to Robert Fulton, the inventor of the steamboat, and another guy, and they tried to keep other steamboat operators from operating. Well, there was somebody else who wanted to operate from New Jersey, and the guy says, you can't do this. This is federal. This goes between states. This is interstate commerce. And that, of course, is what the Commerce Clause says, is that Congress has the power over interstate commerce. Not intrastate, interstate. Okay? And the steamboats were going back and forth between New York and New Jersey, among other things. Okay? And the court said, you cannot stop these people from participating in the riverboat, in the steamboat traffic. Okay? Because the Constitution gives Congress the power to control interstate commerce, not the states. Okay? What was U.S. versus Lopez about?
Guns on school.
Guns on school zones. And what did they argue about why this should be something? Hello, Timmy. What did they argue about why this should be something that should be allowed, why they should be allowed to? Yeah, they said it affects commerce. Basically, guns go in commerce. And what did the Supreme Court say? No. Said, no, that's a reach. That's too far. Said there really is no connection. And so they ruled that the state law that tried to regulate guns in school zones was unconstitutional. Okay? We just started a few minutes ago. Okay, now we talked a little bit about Gonzalez versus Raich. We'll probably talk a little bit more about it in our reviews. What was it about? You guys remember what it was about?
It was about growing
marijuana. It's about medical marijuana in California, right? And the people argued that it was medical marijuana, and so the state should be allowed to make it legal. What did the court say? No. Federal law says it's illegal. It's illegal. Okay? Now, the argument there was also the Commerce Clause. Okay? And one of the things they might ask you is to contrast Lopez and Gonzalez. Why does Lopez say it's not covered under the Commerce Clause? And Gonzalez versus Raich say that it is. We can regulate marijuana under the Commerce Clause. Okay? Now, other clauses that are important. Is that okay on the Commerce Clause? We do. The Commerce regulates a load of stuff under the Commerce Clause. Another important clause is the necessary and proper clause, otherwise known as the elastic clause. And basically, this is the end of Section 8, right? Okay? And in what case did the court talk about this? Again, McCulloch versus Maryland. Okay? So McCulloch is important for two reasons, the supremacy clause ruling and the ruling on the necessary and proper clause. Okay, so there was a challenge to the bank, right? And one of the challenges to the bank is that the federal government doesn't have the power to establish the bank. There is no enumerated power, specifically listed power, in Section 8 that says you can set up a bank. Why did Chief Justice Marshall say that the necessary and proper clause allowed the bank?
Because they needed it to exercise their
Yes,
enumerated.
they needed to be able to do this to exercise the specific powers that they were given. Okay, taxation powers, for example. Right? So they call it, what kind of power? We have enumerated powers, the ones that are explicitly listed, and we call the others implied powers. Implied powers, okay? So, Chief Justice Marshall said, it is okay to have a bank. Now, the 10th Amendment, what does the 10th Amendment say? It's related to federalism. We just talked about this on civil rights.
States that power.
Yes, anything that is not, any power that's not expressly given to the federal government is assumed to belong to the states. Okay? Now, this is, we don't really change the law very much with the 10th Amendment. It's basically a truism. It acknowledges what is true already elsewhere. Okay? But it is there. It is there. And there are a lot of people who say it should be more important than it is. The people who want more states' rights. The 11th Amendment, I don't think you really have to worry about. So we won't talk about it here. I'm trying, actually, I thought I knew what it was. I thought it was about the president, but it's in the Federalist section, so it must not be. And I can't look in there because our government text does not have a copy of the Constitution. Don't you find that weird?
The judicial powers of the United States shall not be constrained to
Oh yeah, I remember. The 11th Amendment says that people in a state who belong to a state, citizens, cannot sue that state. You could have interpreted the Article 3 to say that anybody can sue a state in federal court. And they didn't want people suing their own states in federal court. Because people would do it all the time. And it would be a mess. And because of state sovereignty. If somebody sues you as a state, the matter is an issue between you and your citizen, right? It's not really a federal matter in most cases. Okay? Right. What's dual federalism?
When the powers of state and federal exist in one.
Yeah, basically they have separate spheres, and the state governments act in one sphere, and the federal government acts in another sphere. How does that change with cooperative federalism? They share. And that is the case that we have right now, right? Okay, we have cooperative federalism. It's also sometimes called modern federalism. And devolution. What's devolution? Somebody here had that in one of their cards yesterday.
when the states get more power?
Yeah, when power that was assumed by the federal government is given back to the states. Okay? And an example of this is the Federal Welfare Reform Act in 1996. Okay? It gave a lot more responsibility for deciding who would get welfare payments and deciding how much they would get. Gave a lot more of that responsibility to states. They just started issuing block money to states and said, here, you divide it up. Okay. What?
No. Sorry.
Okay. Two more clauses. These are about state obligations, not federal government obligations. Okay. One of them is the full faith and credit clause. It says that each state has to honor the actions of other states. If you get married in California and you go to Nevada, Nevada has to see you as married. This, of course, was one of the problem issues with gay people getting married, because some states wanted to ban it and some states didn't. Okay, but now we make everybody accept it. Okay, I'm trying to think of other examples. Child custody orders are something that often come up in this context. The Privileges and Immunities Clause says that you can't treat citizens of other states differently than your own citizens. You can't tell them that they have to drive 50 and the rest of us can drive 70, or whatever. California tried to charge people who came into the country, into the state. I think they even tried to charge them like $1 to move in one time. This was a long time ago. But the court rejected that, said it's a penalty on you, okay, for moving, and you shouldn't have to suffer that penalty in our country. Okay, fiscal federalism. What's it all about? Grants, right? Grants of money from the federal government to the state government. Okay? It also refers to taxing and spending. Okay? Fiscal federalism is not just about the grants that get given, it's about how Congress taxes people and how they spend their money. So there are basically two parts to it. The bureaucracy is basically the one giving, well, the Congress does to some extent, but the money goes out and in the grants. And it goes out in the spending, but it gets taken in the tax. Okay, so the grant system. There are several different kinds of grants, right? Which one would you prefer of these? A block grant. Why?
It's just money.
Yeah, basically they just give you the money and they say you can use it for this broad area. Okay? What are categorical grants? How are they different from block grants? Pardon? Yes, they're more limited on what you can use the money for. The specific categories of stuff. Schools get categorical. They talk about categorical money because it's subject to categorical grants. Okay? What are project grants?
Yes, used on a specific project.
Yes. You apply for the grant for a specific project, something like the Goodwill after the assets program that we used to have. Okay? And they give you money for the project. And formula grants? Everybody gets money. There's nobody making a choice. The question is, do you fit the formula? Okay, so Title I money, do you guys know what Title I is? Title I helps the poor in schools. That's one of its functions. Okay, so like the free lunch program and things like that. And Title I has a formula that you figure out about whether schools get Title I money. If you have this many students who are disadvantaged or whatever, okay, that determines whether you get the Title I money. So one of the ways you decide who gets Title I money is whether they get a free or reduced lunch. That's why the school pushes people to sign up, because it raises the money that we can get in the grant. And there's a threshold that one year we didn't meet the threshold to get any money, and we had to get people signed up so we could get some of it. If we're a big enough school, we ought to be getting. Okay. The government often places conditions on the grants that it gives to you. Okay, they could be of any type. For example, they said that if you wanted federal highway money, that you had to raise the drinking age to 21. That's an example of a crossover sanction. I'm going to penalize you in this other area if you don't meet my condition in this area. If you don't change the law on drinking age, then I'm going to penalize you on your funds for highways. Cross-cutting requirements are when I call these sanctions, they're actually requirements. That's when they take a condition that they place on the money, but then they extend it beyond that to other federal programs. For example, one of the examples I think is preventing discrimination. You can't get federal money usually if you discriminate when you use it. Okay? What's a mandate? What does it mean?
You have to do something.
Yes. Congress, a mandate in this context, in the government context, is Congress requiring somebody to do something. It could be a state, could be an individual. Okay? What do we mean by an unfunded mandate? Yeah, you have to do it, but we're not going to give you any money to do it. Yeah. One of the things that did that was the Americans with Disabilities Act. The court said everybody's going to go out and make their buildings handicap accessible. But nobody got any money to do it. And it included the state governments, I think, that had to do it. They had to build ramps and make the bathrooms accessible and things like that.
Wait, so what happens if they just do not do that?
If there's a mandate, a true mandate, then they have to do it.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah, it's not like a grant that's conditional. You can just say, okay, I'm not going to ask for the grant money. I don't want to meet the condition, so I'm not going to get the grant money. Like I thought, during the Obama administration, their policy on education was to make us take all these standardized. Actually, the Obama administration cut back on the standardized tests, but Bush started that. Now I've forgotten where I was going with that. It doesn't matter. If I think of it all. Yeah.
What would the federal government do if a state does not do the thing that the mandate makes them do?
Sue them for one thing.
Why?
It's kind of weird, huh? There are other things they can do, like they can do things with money. Okay. For example, there was a sheriff in Phoenix, which Trump ended up pardoning, but the sheriff had been convicted of, I think, violating people's civil rights because he basically took people he considered to be illegal immigrants, though sometimes they weren't, and would put them in, he'd lock them up, he would take pregnant women and stick them in tents out in the desert. He would just do mean, crazy, cruel things. So he got convicted under federal law because he was doing something he wasn't supposed to do. Now that's not he wasn't following a federal order because he actually got arrested for contempt because he wouldn't do what the court ordered him to do. So if it's a court order, they can find you in contempt and put you in jail, which is what they were going to do until Trump pardoned him. Because after all, he's exactly the kind of person. Sheriff. Okay, so there are some advantages to federalism. You guys remember what any of them are? You should check your notes because I probably won't remember all of them. But one of the great things about federalism is it allows us to try new things. A state can have an idea about how they want to accomplish something, and we can let them try that. We did that a lot under Obama in the education area. Okay? I always thought, this is what I was going to say to you, I always thought, Obama was making us do things, and it turned out that the money they were giving us was not, to me, not really that great. We should have just said, get out of here, we're going to do it our way. We're going to educate kids our way when they wanted us to do things based on the standardized testing. Okay, so states are basically laboratories for new ideas and trying new things, okay? You can have more localized rules with federalism. Each state can deal with its people according to the culture of that state, right? It allows people to be closer to their government because you can't really interact with the federal government very much. All right, your representative represents a lot of people, 750,000. Okay, or 650,000, one of the two. So states and local governments allow people to be more involved. That's a good thing. But it's a disadvantage because it doesn't run very well. Okay, they butt up against each other, right? There are some areas of overlap and some areas where the federal government may try to take over some of the state responsibilities and vice versa. So there's always going to be, a little bit of jockeying against each other, trying to figure out where that line, that very blurred line is. It makes it so that the federal government can't do what it wants to do sometimes, if it doesn't have the power. But often in the past, when it wanted to find the power, it did. Like we got constitutional amendments that allowed us to improve the treatment of the former slaves.
What do other countries have? What do other countries have?
Britain has an unwritten constitution. And I don't know very much about how it works. There are principles of law that have been generated by the common law, by the courts over time, and by the parliament over time. Some countries have a French-style system, which has a lot of laws specifically written down, and you follow those laws. And then the legislature can change those laws if they want to. With a common law system, a lot of the law is judicial law. So the legislature sometimes can't come in there and fix it the way they want it.